I continue with the concept of the eternally asked question, what should I play in the opening? And for these evening's lecture, I was concentrating on a black defense to 1 e4. And I mentioned that there are two types of defenses. The first type is where the e4 pawn is attacked. The second type is where you let the e4 pawn stay where it is. And it was this second type of defense that I'm suggesting for this evening's class, which is to play the accelerated dragon. And that comes from the Sicilian defense, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, takes, g6. And now, this is the crossroad that white faces. And for a lot of players, they are very perturbed when their opponents play c4 and initiate what we call the Maroczy Bind. Okay? So the idea of the Maroczy Bind is, as you can imagine, with these pawns on c4 as well as e4 to control the d5 square and make it exceptionally hard for black to ever gain a measure of counterplay. All right. After the move c4, however, don't be upset. Like, okay, man, you know, you get to play c4. That's just, I'll live with it, you live with it. I feel pretty good, actually, when my opponent plays c4 against me in this position. Why? Because after the move c4, I know you're not going to castle queenside. If this move c4 basically tells me I now know the address of your king. Your king is going to go kingside, which I guess is a very good thing. I already knew. I never had any doubts in my mind. My king is definitely going kingside, it's not going queenside. Okay, so after c4, the line of play is pretty straightforward and forcing. The bishop g7 attacks the knight. The bishop develops, defending the knight. The knight comes out, attacks the pawn on e4. The knight comes out and defends the pawn on e4. Now, funnily enough, this too is a kind of a crossroads position, and black has two main moves. By far, the most common move is the move castles, and it's the move I would recommend. However, in this position, there was a move that was really championed by one of my heroes. Ben Larsen. Bent, you could always count on Bent to stir up the pot and make things spicy. So if you're playing against a player, don't we all play against opponents who we think we should beat, then we could spice it up right from the start. We spice things up with the move knight g4. Holy cow! What kind of move is that? Doesn't the knight on g4, isn't it in capture to the queen? We go queen takes, oh no, because the queen is defending the knight on d4. So can white play knight takes c6 and win a piece? No, he cannot. After the move knight takes e3, knight takes d8, knight takes d1, rook takes d1, king takes d8. The material is even. You may say, yes, Mr. Seirawan, but I've lost my right to castle. It's true. It's true. It's a lament. You can't have everything in life. But this is actually a good position for black, because this kind of middle game ending is actually black has the two bishops, and if black is really greedy, black could also consider the move bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, and only now king takes c7. So by eliminating the knight that was on c3, I prepare a nice little home for my king on c7. Once my king gets to c7, I don't have to worry about any knight checks. And furthermore, these pawns, these double pawns on the c-file are actually to black's benefit. So this position is actually favorable for black.
I think of all the world-class grandmasters in the last 30 years, you've had your king on g8 and black more than
Oh, by far, oh, by far. So I'm really willing to take the risk. So this move knight g4 does spice things up, and most grandmasters settle for the following variation. Queen takes g4, knight takes d4. Well, notice that now that our knight occupies the square d4, it does threaten knight c2 check, forking the king on e1 and the rook on a1. Most grandmasters play the move queen d1, and again it brings us to a crossroads. In a game I had with black against Boris Gulko in a US championship, I supported my knight on d4 with the move e5. That game was a draw, but with hindsight, I would probably like to take that move back. And this is only 25 years later, right? Excuse me, Mr. Arbiter, can I have my move back? Yeah. What Bent Larsen liked to play is the move knight e6. Okay. So what his idea was is if we look at the knight on e6, it doesn't make a very good impression, does it? I mean, what does this knight do on e6? Well, in the first place, it kind of stays in the way of our bishop. Not that our bishop had an open diagonal to begin with. But Bent's idea was very clear. He wanted to play bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, b6, and come with his bishop and his rook to attack this pawn on c4. Or his other idea was that he wanted to play b6, bishop b7. Now he's got the double fianchetto, both bishops on the long diagonal, and with his pawn here, his bishop here, he'd move his king and then play f7, f5, chipping away at white's center in this fashion. And this position is so unexplored amongst amateur players and even amongst professionals, it's very easy for the first player to go wrong. Unfortunately, in the case of Bent, his most celebrated game in this variation, I think, was against Petrosian, and Petrosian killed him. So it does have its risks, shall we say. Ben,
I want to say something funny.
Please.
I've had the position with 96 3 times with black. One was against the gentleman who was just on ICC, Eric Hansing.
Okay, from
One
Canada.
was against somebody who probably lives near you, Don Smates.
Yes.
And I had a draw where my opponent had forced me, and I drew anyway. And I played e5 once, the move you played against Kolkow.
Right.
And I beat Krivensov in the US Championship with it by winning a nice endgame, actually. But yeah, I mean, 96 is a better ball.
Yes.
Although Smates didn't make me look like it was good.
So, in your experience, you're saying that you actually like the move knight e6. You kind of think
Yeah, I
of it.
analyzed it all. I thought it was really interesting, but different than.
Right, and you get different types of middle games.
Karpov pretty easy. I think it was Montreal 79.
Who drew Karpov?
No, Montreal 79. Larsen beat Karpov with the Scandinavian.
Right.
Larsen drew Karpov with 96 in some tournament. Must have been in the early 80s.
Right. And again, this variation has been championed by many, but I think Bent Larsen is the guy who really brought the whole variation to my attention. And again, the point is that this bishop is actually sitting here really very, very nicely on this diagonal. It does have threats, and it does do double duty. When our king castles, it's a wonderful guard, if you will, for the king. So this is the first opportunity where black stands at a crossroad, and the move knight g4 is actually rather good move, deserving of attention, as they would say. I would suggest the move castles, and after castles, we get bishop e2, I believe, as the main move. Take this knight. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, d6. All of these moves have been played, I want to say hundreds of times, but that may be exaggerating. But I do want to say that this position is very, very well known. Okay? And now we have a crossroads from Black's point of view. Black has to ask himself a question. Essentially, this knight is good, this bishop is good, this rook is good, this king is good. The question that Black needs to ask himself is, what does he want to do with this bishop? What does he want to do with his bishop? On the one hand, he can put his bishop on e6 and potentially attack the pawn on c4. On the other hand, he can put his bishop on d7, followed by his bishop on c6, and attack the pawn on e4. One of the things that Black usually doesn't do is he usually doesn't want to play the move b7, b6 too early, because in many cases, once we put our pawn on b6, we end up encouraging our opponent to play a move a4, a5, something that is actually favorable to the first player. The different grandmasters have different approaches. A lot of grandmasters prefer the first option, putting their bishop on e6, followed by queen a5, followed by rook on f8 to c8. That's the first option. I actually think something deserves to be said for the second option, bishop d7. Okay, so at the moment, things are pretty kind of balanced. Black has his fair share of the center. He has good development for his pieces. He's got a safe king. So from all of our checkpoints, check marks, from the opening has been okay. From White's point of view, White is a little bit happier because he's got a pretty good grip over the d5 square. One good square control doesn't make a decisive advantage or anything like that. So I would like my audience to recommend a move for White in this position. If you had the white pieces, what would you do? What would you do? Don't all shout out at once. Here it comes. I feel the birthing process. What would you do, Julian? Again, sorry? Bishop Edgar 3. So this is a kind of a voluntary retreat. I haven't done Bishop David 3. I beg your pardon. Bishop David 3. Okay. So your motivation behind the move bishop d3 is you think that my bishop, or pardon me, White's bishop, is a little bit more effective on d3, and that maybe it gives room for the queen, and you do add extra protection for e4, but on the other hand, it's a whole tempo, right? I mean, you always got to weigh those things. Young man, did you have a suggestion? No. Okay, so one of the things that Black is, we like to say that the opening has three, the opening, that chess has three stages, right? The opening, middle game, end game. Probably you've attended enough of my lectures to know what I consider, when does the middle game begin, right? When is the opening over? To my way of thinking, the opening is over when a player connects his rooks. It's that simple, okay? And makes it very easy, too, to understand when an opening is over, when a middle game starts. Although it's not that vital to understand why the difference, when you're in the opening, you know what you're trying to do. Control the center, develop your pieces, save king. When you're in the middle game, the criteria changes. When you're in the middle game, you're trying to develop a plan. You're trying to create a long-term idea. So after the move bishop d3, black in these types of positions of the Maroczy Bind invariably plays the move queen a5. And the moment this move queen a5 is played, what do? We connect our rooks. So the opening's over. It's that simple. So after we move our queen to a5, what black is trying to do is black does not, let me repeat myself, black does not want to play the move e7, e5. Although you may be tempted to play such a move because you think, oh, when I play the move e5, I attack my opponent's bishop and I gain a tempo, I get to develop my pawn to e5 for free. In fact, you're injuring your own position, because after you play the move e5, first of all, you've created a weakness on d6. Secondly, you've closed your own bishop on the diagonal. So black's play in this position, again, we call it the Maroczy Bind, is not geared towards the center. Strangely enough, it's geared toward the queen side. Black's idea is to bring this rook on f8 to c8, play a7, a6, and b7, b5, attacking this pawn on c4. So, Julian, how would you continue your concept? Knight, David 5, correct? Did I get that one right? Okay. So knight d5. Now, you should almost send me a letter of thanks that your intention was to play knight d5, and my move queen a5 invites you to go knight d5 so that you can capture my pawn on e7. But I'm a crafty fellow. I've been around, you know. I've seen the world, you know. I mean, I've been around, you know. And I'm not that easy to fall for tricks. So I will, of course, take your knight and not allow you to capture my pawn with check. Curse the thought that I should lose a pawn with check. Your bishop on d4 is hanging. You will take it, yes? Bishop takes g7. Now, what Julian is trying to achieve, literally, Karpov made a career, a living career. He must have become a 2800 by achieving these types of middle game positions where his pawn's on c4 and d5, and black had this backward pawn on e7, and Karpov used to torment his opponents by doubling, tripling up against the pawn on e7. Don't let this happen to you. You must avoid these types of positions. In this position, after bishop takes g7, I am not happy that my opponent wants to capture my knight, so I'm going to move my knight. But wait, he's attacking my rook. So I have to move my knight to a clever square. Young man? Bingo. That is the problem with this specific position. Black recognizes that he's going to lose his knight, but he does it in a way that makes white's position very uncomfortable. The knight attacks queen and rook, and if the knight is captured, that will probably be dreadful, 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 because then after king takes, black has a perfect position, the double pawns. Probably white, I think Julian probably intended to move his queen, something like this. Now this is a completely different type of a middle game position. This position I don't think gives black any problems at all. The whole difference is if this pawn were here, I would prefer white. With the pawn here, I think that this position's actually even. Julian, please. instead of queen e2, could you play bishop c3? Sure enough. Well, I would probably, because I'm an old pawn grubber, I would probably just grab the pawn in this position. I would probably just take your queen, you would take my queen, and I would just take the pawn. And I'd be a happy camper a pawn ahead. Also, I just should mention that I do attack the bishop and the pawn, and I could play a move like rook c8 or b6 and the pawn up. It's pretty safe.
Time deciding between this and queen takes c3.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a tough one. And then,
When the knight had taken the rook, he
uh,
was up and the knight had taken the rook.
oh yes, just a second. The queen was up and the knight had taken the rook. Oops, that's not right. Where are we? Yeah, here we are. Just a second. It's at the top, probably. Yeah. I took the rook. Yes, young man. And then I played for white. Did you see a better move?
No, for black. When
Oh, instead of not to take the rook.
no, when you do take the rook.
I do take the rook.
Right.
Okay. This is a good thing, right?
And then the bishop does take the rook.
Yes.
And then why doesn't black
Yes.
do knight to g3?
Oh, yes, that's a possibility.
House before you take the bishop.
Ah, double the pawns. That's clever. That's just like the move knight e3. That is a very, very clever question. And indeed, after knight g3, there is something positive about this. The question that black, again, it's like an open market. You know, you've doubled white's pawns, which is kind of cool, right? You messed them up. But on the other hand, this pawn on g3, these double pawns do control lots of squares. And oh, I should mention probably that I'm missing black's best move here. That in this position, okay, we've seen that after takes the rook, and let's just say for argument's sake, takes the rook, takes the bishop, takes the knight, the position's about even Steven, right? I'm thinking that black has a possibility of queen g5. Ooh. Ooh, queen g5. So I'm threatening checkmate in one. And by the way, I've got a pet theory about chess. It kind of goes like this. Whenever black, out of the opening, threatens a checkmate in one, white has done something wrong. Whenever you allow your opponent the opportunity to give you a checkmate in one threat, you've done something wrong with white. And I think this kind of proves my point, actually. I think that the only move for white here, if white were to capture the knight, then he'd end up with massively ugly, ugly, ugly double pawns. We just can't even contemplate how terrible those pawns are. And we take the bishop. So the only move I see for white that would probably keep him in the game is a move like f4. And now after queen c5, white has to go through some pretty tricky things not to lose material. Rook to f2. I'll take the bishop. I'll take the bishop. I'm that greedy. If you take the rook, I'll take the rook with check. I'll take the bishop, and maybe white's position is not the best. I was thinking about b4. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I was thinking about this move. And now I'm trying to figure out what was going on here. What do you guys think about this? Is this crazy or what? should I take the pawn on b4? Okay. Take the queen. So the the idea is if I take the rook, I wanted to take this rook, but then he could take this pawn. Maybe it's kind of messed up. I'm not so sure. Maybe queen g5 wasn't all. Yes, young lady. C5. Oh, with the pawn on b4, yes? The discover check is excellent. I wanted to take a rook. I wanted to take a pawn. I wanted to do everything. And the discover check is superb. The only problem is my queen's attacked. Hate that. Dope. So we're going to go back, and we're not going to think so highly after the move knight d5, okay? Normally speaking, I think queen d2 everybody and his brother plays, right, Ben? Yeah, I think everybody and his brother, this is the standard move.
Yeah, but my brother's 23.
Your son's not bad either. Queen d2. And now, actually, here again, we have a kind of a crossroads. There's a group of players who think that while queen a5 is okay, it actually should be prefaced with the moves a5 and a4. So a lot of players you see sometimes are playing the moves a5, a4, and only then queen a5. Another group of players are playing the move bishop c6 in this exact position, and their idea is obviously to take this pawn on e4. And what they want to do is they want to force black to play the move f2, f3. A lot of players in this exact position, we're going to go back just one move, actually are feeling very comfortable as black. They don't think that black has too many problems here. However, they have one nagging suspicion that with the move f2, f4, their king might come under attack. So they want to even rule out the small possibility that f4 could give white an opportunity to seize the initiative, so that some players play bishop c6 here. Queen a5, I think, by far is the most common, but let's see what happens after bishop c6. Let's just play along for a moment, and let us try to understand what it is that black accomplishes when he provokes the move f2, f3. We have played bishop c6, f2, f3. We now bring our knight to d7. Well, this and it is. It's not just may, it is. It's kind of contrary to what a lot of I've spoken about on how dearly we love our bishop on g7, and we're not intent on trading dark squared bishops. However, in this position, we do it for a very, very specific reason. What we're hoping is that our queen, after the bishops get traded, can come out here to the square b6 with check and take up residence on the c5 square. That is what black is trying to do. Furthermore, let me just put these moves on the board for a moment. What black is also trying to do is, remember a moment ago I was explaining how this position should be avoided in the sense that this pawn on d5, there's now an open rook. But here the difference is that our minor piece is not a bishop, it's actually a knight. And our knight on d7 has more possibilities in the middle game position than a bishop on d7. For example, one of the things that we could do as black is play, and let's do it. let's do it. Play the move queen b6 check. We'll move the king for just a moment. and we'll play a move like a5. So what we're trying to do with black is either give our knight this very nice outpost on c5, or in some cases move our knight to e5 and put pressure on this pawn on c4 and combine it with a move a4. So this is one of the things that, and also, pardon me, after the move knight d5, I am not forced to capture this piece right away. I could potentially kick the knight away, pardon me, with a move e6. I do create a backward pawn on the square d6, but I do it for very concrete tactical reasons. I think that, for example, after the knight retreats, I play queen b6, I'm in time to play rook d8 and knight back to f6 and keep my pawn on d6 nicely protected. For those of you who play the hedgehog variation, this is a kind of perfect hedgehog that black has achieved exactly what he wants to, and traded two pairs of minor pieces while doing it.